news you can use.
Welcome to The Scoop, a program that's devoted to giving you some news that you can use in your daily life. Might be helpful to you, your family, your friends, your neighbors, and we'd love to hear from you about that. I'm Louise Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of Tampa Bay Community Network, a public access television station located in Tampa, Florida. Today we're going to be talking about Meals on Wheels, and we have as a guest today Stephen King, the Executive Director of Meals on Wheels, and he'll be talking to us in just a minute about Meals on Wheels and the services that they provide. Welcome back to The Scoop. Today we're talking about Meals on Wheels with Executive Director of the Meals on Wheels in Tampa, Florida, Stephen King. Steve, just so people understand what Meals on Wheels does, because I know I've been under some false impressions, what do you do?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us on here today, Louise. Meals on Wheels cares for the seniors and the homebound of the community, whether it's Meals on Wheels of Tampa in our community or anywhere around the country. Primarily, we are involved in allowing our homebound to remain independent and living in their own homes rather than to choose an alternative living facility.
I think the thing that I was confused about, and some people might be, is homebound. Does that mean permanently homebound, or could it be temporarily homebound? And then what about income levels? Because I think it's been, most of us have thought that Meals on Wheels has only been available for low income, and I know that that's not so. Exactly.
That's correct. That's not so.
So give me homebound first.
Okay. Well, I keep in mind that I can only speak to Meals on Wheels of Tampa, which is where I am.
Right.
Meals on Wheels is a national organization, but underneath that umbrella there are literally hundreds of Meals on Wheels organizations, and each one operates, in essence, independently. So I can speak to Meals on Wheels of Tampa, but that might not apply to Meals on Wheels of Bradenton or some other place in our area.
Okay.
But we define homebound very loosely. We define homebound as anybody who has trouble cooking or shopping for themselves.
I have trouble cooking and shopping.
Me too sometimes. But keep in mind that one of the major differences between the Meals on Wheels organizations is that we are a private entity. We're supported completely by the generosity of our community. Other Meals on Wheels organizations are tied directly in with government funding, government grants. We're not, but others are.
So they may be required to take care of certain people.
That's correct. There may be financial implications, socioeconomic factors that determine who they serve and who they don't serve.
Okay.
For Meals on Wheels of Tampa, 34 years ago in our charter, we decided to be a private entity and not to rely on government funding for the specific reason to be able to serve anybody, anytime who is homebound. So for us, we can serve, regardless of those financial factors.
So if someone was homebound for, they were going to be homebound for, let's say, 3 weeks or 6 weeks because of an injury sustained at work or in a car accident, and they live alone, could they be accommodated by your
Absolutely,
group?
Absolutely, even for just a few days. One of the myths about Meals on Wheels as a whole is that we only serve senior citizens, and we certainly do serve seniors and the elderly who are in need, no doubt about that. That's our primary group. But about 40% of the people we serve at Meals on Wheels of Tampa are under the age of 60 years old. Our youngest recipient is 26, and we have them all along the spectrum. For some people, they'll get out of surgery in the hospital and they just need help for a week until they get back on their feet. Others maybe need a couple months while they're on disability, for short-term disability for some reason. We have others who are, in fact, our youngest recipient that I referred to earlier has some complications from an accident he had as a child and probably will need our services the rest of his life to remain independent in his own home. So,
Tell me about the delivery of the meals. Now, that's done by staff members or volunteers
at Meals on Wheels of Tampa, it's done completely by volunteers.
who get no compensation whatsoever?
That's correct. And in fact, we have about 500 volunteers who deliver our meals on a regular basis. Usually once a week, sometimes once every other week, we employ those volunteers. And so those volunteers donate their time, their gas. They're doing it out of the goodness of their heart. And we couldn't carry out our mission without those volunteers.
Do the Meals on Wheels chapters in other parts of the state of Florida, at least, do they also operate with volunteers?
Most of them do. There are some, and this is not in our community, but I understand that Meals on Wheels of San Diego, which is very large, does theirs completely by paid staff drivers. But most of the Meals on Wheels around the country utilize volunteers to deliver the meals.
Tell me about the meals themselves. How are they? Do you subcontract out for the meals themselves, or does Meals on Wheels make the meals?
We cook all our own meals at Meals on Wheels of Tampa. Again, depending on the Meals on Wheels that you're talking about, things could be different. But we prepare all our food fresh. Our kitchen staff comes in every morning at about 5:30, prepares the meals. By 8 o'clock, the meals are sealed to be safe and kept temperature ready, placed in bags. By 9 o'clock, they're placed in our trucks and on the road to different drop-off sites around the city, and the volunteers come to the drop-off sites and then deliver them to our recipients.
Do they get one meal at a time, or do they get more than multiple meals?
They get one meal. We deliver one hot meal, usually between 11 to 12:30. It's
Considered the lunch meal.
Correct, and it's consistent every day. Now, many of our recipients, because they are limited in their financial resources, we do have recipients who take that meal, which is a good, healthy meal, and split it in two and have half for lunch and half for dinner.
Because it's good enough it'll last them, or maybe
Right,
they don't need as much.
because they need to make it last. I mean, because many of the people we do serve aren't able to go out and buy food elsewhere.
So are the meals made up from a dietitian kind of menu that is, I'm sure, somewhat wholesome, has
Right.
enough proteins and so forth? How does that work?
We follow government guidelines on all of those issues, and our meals are very, very healthy. They're heart-healthy meals with low in sodium, the correct amounts of protein, and so on and so forth, fat and all those things. So yes, our food services director, our head chef, Tony Pineda, does a great job in coordinating that.
I'd like to know more about how, well, first of all, you need volunteers, so I think the audience needs to know that in case they feel like they're missing something, and the kind of experience that they might get from that. But also how to access the services and whether they're always free or at a cost and those kinds of things. So we'll talk in just a minute. Welcome back to The Scoop. We're talking today with Stephen King, the Executive Director of Meals on Wheels, about that agency and how you can volunteer for it, access its services, or understand more, donate to it, and so forth. About the meals, sometimes the meals are free and sometimes one pays for them. Is that correct?
That's correct. And again, I'll speak to you from the perspective of Meals on Wheels of Tampa, understanding that all Meals on Wheels operate independently, and so they set their own guidelines. But our meals are $4.75 a meal. However, nobody is ever refused based on their inability to pay. As a matter of fact, only about 30% of the 500 people we serve every day pay full price for their meal. About another 50% pay on a sliding scale, usually $1 or $1.50. And then 20% of the folks that we serve aren't able to pay anything at all. To supplement the funds needed for those meals, the Tampa community, through their generosity, that's how we use their monies that are donated.
How's it determined whether one would pay nothing, or is there a wage?
Again, we don't ask for any financial information. We do, in our intake process, when somebody calls in, our intake coordinator asks them some very basic questions to feel out their situation, first to determine if they're homebound, and then to see what they're able to pay. And you know, by and large, we're very trusting in our intake process. For us, if we err, we want to make sure we err on the side of love and of caring for people and of delivering meals, rather than, you know, to deny that privilege to folks.
So if they tell you they can only afford $1 or $2, that may be how they'll pay for it.
Absolutely.
And the people that are they're okay financially, they'll pay $4.75 for the meal
That's correct.
for the period of time they need it. And people don't usually, I would imagine, they don't usually say, look, I'd like this every day for the rest of my life, even though I'm not homebound. How do you check on homeboundness?
Well, of course, our volunteer network, we see the people every day, and so there's, most of the folks that come on our program, they'll let us know when they're no longer homebound. But those that we do have people that have been on for several years, and we know in those cases their situation, whether it's a physical illness or some other debilitating factor that determines that. So,
do you normally get calls from even out of state or out of the area from because we have so many retired folks here in Florida, in Tampa Bay, and elsewhere in Florida, from their children outside of here, saying, "Look, I'm worried. I don't think my parents been able to feed themselves, and I can't get there."
Absolutely, it's not uncommon at all for us to get calls from children, grown children. I have a mom who's 85. I would be a perfect example of somebody out of state who might call us and say, "My mom lives in Tampa. I'm worried about that she's not eating well. I want to go ahead and set her up on the program and pay for her meals, and we can start delivery the next day to her."
You gave me a breakdown before of the percentage of people who might pay. What is the percentage of people according to their demographic? Are you serving, say, 50% of the people are over 60 years of age, or?
Yes, 60% of the people that we serve are 60 years old and over. 40% are under 60 years old.
And what percentage of them are being served because they're elderly and can't get around versus homebound, in and out kind of?
Very, very few. I mean, I don't have an exact figure for you, but I would venture to guess that 99% of the people we serve them because they are homebound, not necessarily because they are seniors. Although we will serve a senior citizen if they want to have our service, but by and large, it's the homebound that we take care of.
And are there specific numbers tracked of people who may have been temporarily disabled versus long term?
There are, Louise, but to tell you the truth, I didn't bring those. I don't know those numbers.
Right. That's all right.
My
That's
intake coordinator could tell you all that stuff.
Oh, we'll have her on next. Okay, so, but for purposes of our explaining and giving news to folks about what they can use, it can be that the facility in their neighborhood or that is serving their neighborhood could be doing some of these same things.
Absolutely.
Where you just don't realize that you can't get out, you don't have anybody to run your errands,
Right.
you don't want to ask, and so they can come by. Do the volunteers have some time to visit with the folks too?
They do. A volunteer does a route that usually takes about an hour and includes anywhere from 8 to 14 people that they bring the hot meal to. Inevitably, over time, they develop relationships with these recipients, and There's some wonderful, wonderful stories of people who have, made really or had relationships with our recipients in such a way that they've almost become like family. And just some, so yes, a lot of times, now that's not every case. A lot of times you bring the meal and the person says thank you and they take and go in. They don't want to chat.
Right.
But it just depends on the recipient, whatever their needs are.
This is a way that I guess folks who would ordinarily maybe not receive a call from anybody every single day could be checked on as well.
Absolutely.
Because if you're not well and you might need some help, if they don't come to the door or something, would that be reported?
Absolutely. If somebody is not home when our volunteer knocks on the door, if they don't answer to receive their meal, our volunteers are trained to call us immediately, and we immediately contact the emergency contact of that individual. There's been several cases where that I could tell you about where one of our volunteers has called us and we've called a loved one and they found out that the person we're serving has been laying on the bathroom floor for 4 hours or couldn't get up and just had no way to get the word out. And if our volunteer hadn't come by and passed that information on to us to check on, who knows what would have happened.
And that is a really inexpensive way to just make sure that your parent is checked on.
It's a very caring network, and what we do is we nourish the body through our food, we enrich the soul through our volunteers, and we strengthen the community by making sure we care for those that are out there that are in need.
When the volunteer gets, you said what, about 8 people, 6 or 8 or 10 people that they
8,
typically
10,
serve?
12.
They're all in one little area, right?
That's correct.
So that they don't have to spend a fortune on gas as it is today. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Scoop. Today we've been talking about Meals on Wheels with Stephen King, the executive director of the Tampa branch of Meals on Wheels. Stephen, talk about the volunteers. Who is your typical volunteer? I mean, I might be watching the show and wondering if I fit in that groove or not. I might want to be giving something back to my community.
It's really all over the board. We have volunteers. We have many teenagers in school who work with their parents to serve meals, and we have folks who have retired several years ago who serve meals. So it's all over the board, but probably the bulk of our volunteers are people who are nearly retired or recently retired who decide they have some time and they want to make a positive difference in the community and the lives of others. We also have a great program called our Adopter Out Partners. Adopter Outs are businesses that commit to serve a route on a weekly basis, once a week, and they allow their employees to take the time to go out and serve that particular route, that particular group of people once a week. And
could they rotate the employees so that it may not be the same person
correct.
And the burden isn't as great on one person?
That's exactly right.
That's pretty good. Adopt a route?
Adopt a route. It's a great program.
And again, this is only Tampa?
That's correct.
Okay, but other places might have some other things.
They might as well.
The volunteers, if somebody calls you up and says, all right, I want to do it, this is just driven about something to do and maybe some kind of awareness that there are people out there that need this kind of help, or maybe their parents were in it, or?
Yeah, we have a lot of people who have those kind of connections in their past. Their family members were served or whatever. But all our volunteers come basically with just a heart for the elderly and the homebound, and then we have our volunteers go on a ride along with somebody who is doing a route, so they can actually experience it one time to make sure it's what they want. 90% of the time, those folks, have a great experience, and then they're hooked as far as being a volunteer.
Is there, besides the ride along, is there some other training that takes place about, how to deal with folks who may be homebound?
There's a training booklet that we have, and our community services director talks to each volunteer to make sure they understand the process that we use and some of the do's and don'ts, that type of thing. We don't have an official training class We used to do that, but our volunteers are spread out in such a large area that we started doing it one-on-one.
The people that volunteer are not always unemployed, are they?
No, no, many. We have.
Because they're doing it at lunchtime, or maybe they are shift workers.
That's correct. Or in some cases, you have folks who just have the flexibility to be able to say, I'm going to take an early lunch that day and I'm going to go out and serve. And yeah, many of our folks are employed and use their lunch hour once a week to go serve.
Okay. Well, I think you've given people a really good idea about how they can serve. We'll talk a little bit more about Meals on Wheels and how people can access your website and maybe some of the others and find out about any monthly. We're back with The Scoop, trying to give you some really good news that you can use. And today we learned a whole lot about Meals on Wheels. And in Tampa, we have Steve King here. Steve, tell me about your monthly luncheons that people can come to.
On the second Wednesday of every month from 12 to 1, we have what we call a Nourish at Noon, where we invite people from the community to come to our offices and we give them the meal that's being served to that recipient that day and talk with them about our mission and our program and why we do what we do. There's no financial ask or there's no time ask. It's just an informational luncheon. So we'd love to have anybody.
I keep thinking about being a baby boomer myself. Everyone's on everyone's mind is how we're all aging, and there's a big group of us. And so what kind of plans are there for expansion as the population gets older and perhaps more homebound?
Well, I mean, that's a great question because we know literally right now there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds more throughout Tampa that need our services. We just got to get to them. And we have just expanded in the last year and a half into the Lutz area and are doing some more expansion into the Keystone areas of North Tampa. We want to expand our borders of who we serve and also expand who we serve internally because we know that there's folks that could use our meals.
You're not waitlisting anybody. You're just saying that these folks don't know that they can.
That's correct.
So you will be growing, and I appreciate your coming on, and I think that maybe people will spread the word of seeing the show about Meals on Wheels and make sure that more people get on your list and volunteer their time, donate, and perhaps be able to help you succeed and move on and get in with more people. Thank you for tuning in.
News you can use.